Good morning and welcome to our new 6 a.m. Series called But First, Plants. If you caught our previous 6 a.m. sessions, which was Bible study, I hope you really enjoyed this one. And I'm going to ask the same thing that I did before. If you're catching the replay, just hashtag replay for me in the comments. That does a couple of things. One, it lets me know that you've actually seen this. So if you have any questions, by all means, please talk with me. And two, what that does by commenting is it helps other people find our series here, which I hope that you enjoy. So this morning we're going to be talking about, obviously, plants. And if you caught our Bible study, you know that plants were, of course, created by God, and they were created good, and they were created for mankind, because, of course, he put man first in a garden, right? So we were surrounded by plants, and they were used historically for everything from food to medicine to beauty, you name it, plants were used for it. And it's only in our more modern times that we have gotten away from using plants and depended more on ourselves creating things in labs. But plants have been there from the beginning. And that's kind of what we're going to start looking at this morning and in this whole series. So I hope you enjoy. Let's go ahead and dig in. So when it comes to your plant juice, because obviously I use lots and lots of plant juice every day, how do you know that it contains everything that was contained in the plant? And when I say plant juice, of course, I mean these tiny little bottles that are supposed to contain plant essence. Now, personally, I use Young Living, and the reason I do is because I trust that Young Living's plant juice actually contains everything that the original plant contained. And I do that because they have a seed to seal guarantee. And what that guarantee is saying is that we look at the plant from the seed, because we have our own farms, and we control, the soil it's grown in and what goes on the plant, which is nothing, is in the form of chemicals. They don't use chemical fertilizers or chemical means of pest control or any of that, all the way until through the distillation process, which is an art form in and of itself. To get everything that's in the plant into the oil is not something that most people can do. And then they have very rigorous testing, both in-house and with third-party labs. And basically, once that bottle is sealed, they guarantee that what is in there is the same thing as what was in the plant. And how do I know that? Well, the history of Young Living goes back, of course, to a man named Gary Young, who started the whole thing. And in fact, he is the not just the modern leader in essential oils, but he started the whole movement of essential oils. Because essential oils had been used all throughout history until we kind of hit that scientific dark age era. And then I'm not sure if they just fell out of favor or what, but man kind of turned away in general from using God's plants and started relying more on themselves. And so that kind of created like our modern medical industry, through a series of things. And we got away from using herbs and plants and things for our healing. Not to say you can't still find herbalists and whatnot, but in general, we have turned more to that scientific, let's see what in this plant is causing us to do, and so let's take it out and then make our own, and we'll use that. And modern medicine absolutely has its own place. But anytime you get away from what God created, sorry, I've got like a hair that keeps tickling my face. There it is. Anytime you get away from what God has created, I'm not going to say it isn't, well, it isn't good, because you're missing out on the blessings that he has provided. So Gary Young, if you look back through his history, he's a farmer. So he grew up on a farm. In fact, when he left home, he wanted to start a homestead in Canada. And he did. He had a very successful logging business. And then one day there was a horrible accident, and he was severely injured. In fact, he was paralyzed. And the doctors told him that he would never walk again. And that's kind of where his whole journey into plants and healing really started, was with himself. Because, after a couple of, obviously the man fell into a very deep depression, and after God used his father to kick his butt and get him out of it, he decided that listening to the doctors and staying paralyzed was not what he wanted. So he started researching like crazy, and he started looking at plants and all the things. Anyway, so this whole modern essential oil movement actually started with a man who was looking for healing for himself. And when he found it, because he not only did he walk again, but he ran again, he rode horses again, he was in jousting competitions. The man ran through assistants like crazy because they had trouble keeping up with him. Craziness. Anyway, so he did all those things, but he knew that God had given this to him so that he could go and share it with the world, which is phenomenal. So that is how everything started. And there have been other companies that have come and attempted to do all that Young Living has done, and Gary Young. And anyway, I'm not going to go into all that, but the big thing is distilling, right? Because how do you get what is in the plant to make sure it all comes down into the oil and you don't lose any? That is a very fine art. It's not really something you can do in your kitchen, although that's kind of how it started. But there's been a lot of trial and error since then. So I'm actually going to read you some of these quotes from this book, D. Gary Young, The World Leader in Essential Oils, Seed to Seal. This book was actually written by Mary Young, Gary's wife, and it chronicles his life and his journey, and basically everything that he did to learn about plants and oils and how that very special art of distilling. So what happened, Gary, there was a guy in France. His name was Jean. I'd have to look at it. Anyway, his name was Jean. And he grew really fantastic lavender in France. In fact, most of the lavender in France actually goes to the perfume industry. And he knew that he had super high quality lavender that could actually help people. And he didn't want it to go to the perfume industry. But there was really nothing else. So through something, he ended up coming to, I think, California. Anyway, somewhere in the States. And he's at some kind of big convention, and he's looking around trying to see if there's anyone who would actually appreciate the high quality of lavender that he grew. And he was getting pretty disappointed when he ran across this cowboy who had a little table, and on it he was talking about aromatherapy. And anyway, they got to talking, and sure enough, the cowboy was Gary Young, and he was talking about the healing power of plants. And so he and Jean connected. Gary ends up going to France, and he, of course, fell in love with the lavender there because it was actual lavender. And, he became a naturopath doctor. And anyway, so through several trips to France, he actually learned about distilling in France because the French have been distilling oils for hundreds of years. Let me pull this quote out for you because it was very interesting. Just a second. So the first guy that Gary learned distilling from was called Marcel. And I'm not very good on French pronunciation, so I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name. So Marcel, the first, Jean Noel. Jean Noel was the man he met at the convention and then went to his farm in France. And Marcel was the guy who taught him distilling, because basically Jean Noel brought him to the distillery that they used, and Gary, being Gary, jumped right in. I mean, he's talking fill in the firebox, anything Marcel asked him to do to show Marcel that he really wanted to learn. And sure enough, he did learn. But there was another guy who was considered the master distiller. Old French man, didn't really care for curious curious foreigners, especially curious Americans who were kind of nosy and maybe pushy. I don't know. But anyway, so his name was Henry, or Henri, I guess would be how you pronounce it in French. So Gary heard about this guy and wanted to meet him. But because at that time, Henri was considered the father of distillation. And apparently he did not live far from Jean Noel, but he did not like visitors, especially curious Americans. But Gary persisted. And after 5 years, Henri came to Jean Noel's house for dinner while Gary happened to be there. So he interviewed Gary and asked Gary what essential oils meant to him. And I'm direct quote now. Feeling tremendous pressure and much anxiety, Gary said, "I believe that essential oils are the closest physical and tangible substance that carries the Spirit of God on earth." Pointing his finger at Gary and in a dramatic tone of voice with a heavy French accent, he said, "You are right, and anyone who messes with them should be treated like a criminal." Then he stood up, turned, and abruptly walked out the door. Okay, end quote. And then Jean Noel walked him out to his car, and when he came back, he told Gary that Henri wanted to see him on his mountain at 6 a.m. So Gary actually got to learn from this man considered to be the father of distillation in France. And he learned, and he brought that back to the States. And that is where, where our high quality oils come from, right? Was this knowledge that has been passed down through the generations. In fact, later on in the book, it says in the 2002 convention here in the States, Marcel, the first guy who taught Gary distillation, ended up coming over to back to the States for that one, and he saw all that Gary was doing, and he, in front of the entire convention, told everyone that the student had now become the teacher. So in other words, in his lifetime, he surpassed his teachers in their knowledge, which is fascinating. It also was talking about, at one point in the book, Gary wasn't really, he had designed like a new lid for the cookers and the distillers, and he wasn't sure how it was working. Now, OSHA would probably freak out. But what he did was he actually climbed in to the pot. The distiller had other people close him in and turn it on so he could watch the steam and how it was moving, which is insane. Obviously, they didn't leave it on very long at all, just long enough for him to see. He got out, and he redesigned the lid again because he didn't like how the steam was moving through the plants and in the cooker. And sure enough, after he redesigned the lid, I think they were able to recover like 15 more micro constituents that they hadn't been in there before or something. Crazy, absolutely crazy that the man would climb into a, steam pot and watch steam just because he knew how important it was. Anyway, so that's kind of the history of distilling. There are a lot of very fragile compounds in these plants that are very easy to lose in the distilling process if it's not done properly. But if you can get your plant juice to have everything the plant contains, it's highly concentrated and a little goes a long way. Whereas if you were using the actual plants, A, you'd have to find them. B, you'd have to make sure they were really good quality, that the soil they're grown in is proper, that they haven't been touched by chemicals, because that messes with things. So that was our history lesson this morning. Ran a little long, sorry about that. Thank you for hanging with me, and we will do this again on Thursday. All right, love you guys. Bye.